Welcome back to Tuesday night. We are the Tuesday night Getting Defensive crew, brought to you by GridironRatings.com. And, we're all just ready to jump into this. We know that you guys are jonesing for your IDP fix here, and we're always ready to give it to you. We'll give you our earnest opinions. But while you're paying attention, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications for YouTube so you can see our beautiful faces every Tuesday night and Thursday night as well. Right now we have Gary, JJ, and Brandon going over maybe not as much free agency now that we're sort of getting to the tail end of that, but they'll still be with you on Thursday nights. Gentlemen, how are you doing? James, how's your night?
I'm doing well. I kind of say the same thing every night when we have these intros. Excited to start talking IDP as every week it's just a little bit closer to like actual meaningful stuff. I know we're still months away. I know I preach that often, but still, I just get excited. I don't know.
Gary, what are you jonesing for tonight?
To come to some kind of satisfaction about this whole Wagner Jones thing. Get it off my chest. Stop talking about it. Stop thinking about it.
Gary, you're not going to stop thinking about it after tonight.
I am. I'm just going to wait because I think it's beyond this point. It's just a matter of time, and only time's going to tell. So, but either way, we'll get that in a little bit. But I'll be glad to not think about it. I hate when these kind of things come up with players like this. Guys get injuries, and I've got a lot of time wrapped up in them, and sometimes it's hard to let go.
Well, we will be getting into that right off the bat here. As you know, our not quite a mascot, but our flagship player perhaps for the Tuesday night show, Ernest Jones, had some news that may affect him here a little bit, and we'll end up seeing. But Bobby Wagner, as you guys have heard by now, signed a 5-year, $15 million deal with the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I did not find specifics as far as exact money, as far as outs and all that sort of stuff when I last checked. But I'm guessing with his age, he's 32 right now, there's probably an out after a few years if they would want to, if he starts to decline. That usually you don't see guys stick around for the length of these contracts anymore. Looking at the sort of position that he is being plugged into as a starter, you have Ernest Jones, the aforementioned player. Traven Howard and Christian Roseboom are really the only other sort of guys that would fit that position. Of course, they have outside linebackers as well. His ratings were down, being Bobby Wagner in 2020, but still decent overall. Coverage was his overall worst rating, and those are his 2021 ratings were down from 2020, but still good. He got sort of outperformed by Jordan Brooks, as we've spoken about on shows prior here. So I know Gary wants to get it off his chest, but James, I'm going to give it to you. What was your initial thought when you saw that Wagner was indeed signing with the Rams?
I mean, my initial thought was, ha, ha, ha. I remember last week when I told you guys that it was likely. In terms of actual fantasy relevance, my initial thought was, I really liked Ernest Jones. I am sad. That's really what splashed in my face and just made me go, darn. Because I had invested in Ernest Jones fairly highly, not just because I like his production, but because I also love the situation. And I just didn't see the Rams investing their cap in another middle linebacker. I thought, Jones was going to be given the reins. They'd invest wherever else they decided to see fit. But, I don't run that team. Someone else does. And, my whims are not the whims of those Rams. And, they're a pretty good team. So maybe they know what they're doing a little bit more than I do. And it was sad, but also it's fantasy football. You get over it kind of quickly and you move on.
And for a little bit of reference here, it does look like I found some info here. Guaranteed money for him is not exactly what you'd think. It seems like it's relatively small up front.
And then I was looking at the contract earlier. I think the rumor was he wanted 11 mil or something a year. And I don't think that they're done yet. They're actually working on other contracts, and they've already said that they've left the table, coming back to renegotiate after they shuffle around a bunch of other money with like Aaron Donald and such. So I don't think they're done. Sports Tracks right now is showing that they've got it out in 2024.
Yep. So after his third year out of the 5 and really it looks like he could maybe have it after the second year even, because the dead cap goes from 10, 7.5, 3, 2, 1. So again, sort of what we talked about, how it could very well be a shorter contract, which may make sense with the guy that they have they drafted last year that we've talked so much about, Ernest Jones. He was a third round pick, number 103 last year. Improved as the season went on. He was okay in pass coverage, but it was really interesting when you sort of look at the breakdown of how they used their linebackers. And, of course, you can find snap counts by game and all that sort of stuff. And they really only used one sort of inside linebacker per game for the most part. They would use two occasionally here, depending on the game. But, for the first couple weeks of the season, it was really like Troy Reeder and Kenny Young. Kenny Young then, left, and they got Ernest Jones mixed in a little bit. And then, he got hurt, Troy Reeder, and then they split again. So there probably is time for both of them on the field more. And Gary, I know you were looking a lot about what Sean McVay and Les Snead even too were saying specifically about the signing here. So how do you feel about the comments that they want both on the field?
Well, first I want to say I felt like the comments was them throwing a life preserver our way. As Ernest Jones, it's something to grasp onto. Yeah, I made the comment about it. If there's smoke, is there fire? What, man? I mean, I look into the comments that he's made and talking about even how that they could possibly use both Wagner and Jones and blitz from the inside, which I looked back. I was just curious because the last solid inside linebacker for them was Corey Littleton in 2018 and 2019, and he actually blitzed quite a bit. He padded his box with tackles for loss and had a couple of sacks, if I remember right. So it helped him out, at least in terms of IDP. So we know since McVay's been there that, they only use that one linebacker. Now we have him making these kind of comments. I think on the most part, it's wishful thinking, but I also don't think it's far-fetched. I mean, if he truly feels this way, there's no way he knew Bobby Wagner was going to be released. I don't think anybody knew. I'm sure the opposition probably wouldn't have known unless Bobby called him up himself. And he apparently didn't know much either until all of a sudden he's released after 10 years, which I believe helped drive him towards the Rams. I mean, it was like a perfect case scenario. So I'm blaming all this on Pete Carroll and whatever the hell is going on over there. But, you can't treat him. It's just too risky to look at the whole situation and expect them to change what they've been doing for 3 to 4 years now, 4 or 5 years, or whatever it's been, and only having the one main linebacker on there. Now, am I dropping and am I saying walk away from Ernest Jones? No, in deeper formats especially, it depends on what you also spend on him. Unfortunately, if you listened to me last year, you might have spent a little bit too much. You might have reached for him here and there based on my stupidity. But either way, as we sit right now, I mean, if they made the adjustments, if he's talking true, there's a possibility that we could see Wagner as a tier 1 guy, solid guy that he's always been because of the combined tackles and such. And maybe Ernest could knock on the door as an LB2 type guy, possibly. This is the best case scenario I can see at this point. Anything beyond that would be a miracle, So, I mean, if you're sitting on Jones, or if you got the opportunity to pick up Jones, of course his value is really going down. So you're not going to recoup whatever you probably put into him, unless you got him off the waiver wire for free. You might get something for him, but I'm doubtful but hopeful that this will be the situation. I am not going into any of my leagues expecting him to be a starter for my squad. It's not going to happen anymore. That's completely off the table. If this first 3 years, if his first out is not till 2024 and it's a friendly deal, I mean, we might be looking, I've got to admit what they keep doing. They're setting themselves up for multiple Super Bowls here in the next few years, at least put themselves in contention every year to be there. So, I mean, there's no reason that Wagner couldn't just kick back and hang out that 3 years and they work something out. I don't know. I have to look at it that I have to accept it that Ernest Jones high tier one dynasty breakout potential is not there anymore, and it's probably not going to be there as long as Wagner signed. It's just not. It's just not happening. And then hope for a luxury. It's kind of like a draft pick at the moment. If you had a third or fourth rounder, I might still go in a deeper format, give it away a fourth rounder rookie pick or something just to get a hold of them if free agents were available. But yeah, I don't know. It's messed up. It's just time to move on. Bobby Wagner's locked in. Too big of a question on Ernest Jones, and depending on him to be a starter in your lineups.
Gary, do you see any potential, when they're talking about using them both on the field, of kicking Jones outside more and using him more as a pass rusher to try to get them both on the field more?
Well, he specifically mentioned that. He said to have those two. I had to laugh because there was a blurb in there about how he actually said, well, we seen Jones and Bobby Wagner. Apparently they wanted Bobby Wagner at some point, or the GM did. And, so there's all these coincidences in how, he's landed here and how he's landed here. But either way, in the quotes too, he was talking about the skill set of the two guys with Wagner and Jones and how he feels that they can get pressure from the inside and utilize those two to their advantage and have the best 11 guys on the field. We know they don't have Von Miller no more. Now the Hollins kid and another guy, I don't know why they went and got Von Miller unless it was just to make that last quick splash that got him the Super Bowl or what, but those two guys there actually aren't Swiss cheese coming off the edge. They're average guys, but they're fairly decent. So, but they weren't getting the pressure that Von Miller was. So, I mean, if they're not replacing Von Miller as an extreme pass rusher, then why can't we think that they could start using their inside linebackers differently? Are they going to do it? Man, the odds are probably against it. It's probably a smokescreen. But he might be trying to pad this over because he just swept the legs out from underneath Ernest Jones. I don't know. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said everything that needs to be said on it. Very high on him. Do not like the signing for Ernest Jones. Really think he's a good player and can play elsewhere. Do I really believe what the GM and the organization is saying, which is, oh, we love him? No, that's just organizational coach speak. If you loved him, you would not have brought in Bobby Wagner. That's not to say Bobby Wagner is not elite, but you don't, bring in Bobby Wagner with you, Micah Parsons, and just send Micah Parsons down the line. You don't need to do that. You're going to spend your cap elsewhere, which is, goes back to my original point of why I thought the cap would be spent elsewhere, but they like Bobby Wagner, and they like him more than Ernest Jones, and I kind of hit it already, but this is fantasy football. You fall in love with somebody, and when the news shifts, when the value moves, you got to get off the train. If I've invested in Ernest Jones, I probably overpaid for him based on where he is today, but I also did it based under the assumption Bobby Wagner wasn't going to be in a Rams uniform. Turns out he is. I need to adjust. Maybe he gets, cut in a redraft league because I can't wait around. That's very plausible. I don't know what else is out there. I don't know how deep you're running. But if you're in a standard 12-man where you're just starting two linebackers, he doesn't need to be really involved until you see production on the field. And if you're going to sit and wait, you better have deep benches because people are going to produce at a higher probability than what Jones is going to produce. So I'm being a little long-winded. I feel hurt in the sense of the guy that I hyped up out of this rookie class that I hated so much is just being bashed and dashed and promised nothing. But that also is what happens with all the rookies. They're not promised tomorrow. No one's promised tomorrow. Veterans aren't promised tomorrow. It's the National Football League. It's not for long. You like a guy and suddenly, his options are gone. Why? Somebody else showed up. It's the nature of the beast. Ernest Jones definitely should not be on any sort of standard size league radar outside of, let's see what he does in the first 3 weeks. Could he move outside? Yeah, I think he could move outside. That would also take them not bringing in any new names and just sitting on their roster, which Super Bowl contenders don't do. They bring in edge rushers because they need edge rushers, and older veteran guys go to places to try and win Super Bowls when they're Super Bowl contenders. So I see Jones just being their luxury depth piece to show up, when an injury comes up. So maybe when that future edge rusher signs and gets hurt, maybe Jones slides in there, maybe, but I'm doing a lot of speculation for a guy who I want to have fantasy relevance, and it's too much. You can cut and wait and see. Go invest in somebody with better upside right now because Jones needs an injury. Jones needs something weird to happen that hasn't happened previously. And these are all the type of things you say when things aren't likely. On the offensive side of the ball, can a team put up two great running backs? Yeah, it's possible. We've seen it happen, but no way in hell should you bet on it. This team, there's not going to be two elite linebackers, or at least not likely. So pass on Jones, go with Wagner, take your lumps and move on.
Well, you can never say never. Okay, so you had elite kind of production out of Jones and Olakun last year. You had it out of Brooks, you had it out of Wagner, but it's very rare. It's very rare, especially with it all stacked up against them already, because they just don't even use two linebackers at the same time.
That's the real point. Is
to set that
this
up.
Is a defense that is very set in stone. They just went to the Super Bowl. They're not exactly looking to shift things around.
Yeah.
They're not, a new
despite whatever they say
coordinator.
Right.
It's going to be what it is, or at least that's what they want it to be, and they're going to build around trying to make it what it was. Because last year it was pretty dang good. So why would they be changing it? Why would they be making wholesale shifts? It doesn't make sense. We haven't seen them do it in the past, so you shouldn't expect them to do it going forward. It could happen, but I could get signed to an NFL team. It could happen. It's just not likely.
Well, let me ask you guys a league-specific question. So I have them in a league. It's my deep league where you start 3 linebackers. It's 12 teams. And there's 55-man rosters. So again, one of those deep leagues. And I got him. I didn't even draft him because most of it's a Devy league, so a lot of Devy players get taken in the draft instead. I got him free, Ernest Jones, after the draft off of waivers.
Nice.
Hold on to him there and see what happens. I mean, the waivers are relative.
What do you have? What do you have to lose? I mean, who would you replace him with? I mean, that's the first thing I would ask. I mean, what could even possibly be on there that a player would have with that deep of 55 guys, that size of league? Yeah, I mean, what's even on the waiver wire that you would think about replacing Ernest Jones with?
Yeah, I'm guessing not a lot. I mean, we start 9, I think, defensive players total, and it's all in specific positions, defensive tackles, quarterback, and that sort of stuff. So they're pretty grim, really.
Right. Well, as you know, we're in the IDP incentive draft right now, and I had to name a keeper last week, and it had to be Ernest Jones or Holcomb at one of my linebacker positions. So I went with Ernest Jones. Wagner hadn't signed yet, and I was praying to the fantasy football gods that it wouldn't happen, but it did. So, anyways, all of a sudden, once they're locked and we dropped all of our players and Bobby Wagner signs, and I'm looking at Jones, and I could have kept at least a little bit more upside in production for the year. But our benches aren't that shallow. I'm entering the idea. I'm going to have him on my bench. I'm not dropping him. It would take a really good waiver wire pickup, outstanding one for me to drop him at this point. But I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it to the first few weeks of the season and just get an idea of what it is, before I get to extreme where I'm just going to drop him and walk on. That's the one thing about it. He still has his future upside, but the likelihood is that if he's not worth anything to me, then he's probably not worth anything to anybody else. So, but at this point, he's still got a peak. I'd hold on to him. I don't in a deep format like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you guys got James, if you got the depth on any of your leagues, probably not redraft, but a dynasty league where you've already invested and you can hold on to them without really losing any cost, you might as well, because just like we didn't know with the signing what could happen, who knows what happens leading up to the season? People get injured all the time, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, go ahead, James.
I was going to say, that's kind of where I was going to lead, which is, does Ernest Jones's outlook look good right now? It does not. But what's going to happen is either I'm going to be right in saying it's not good and and Gary's going to be right and it's not good, and Bobby Wagner's going to be great. Or vice versa, someone's going to get hurt. We're going to shift our view, and whatever it's going to happen will be happening quickly. We will know by week 4 what to do with Ernest Jones, whether it's keep him rostered, they shifted him outside, things look okay, he's looking good as the LB2 in this defense, or we're going to go not good, injury sub only, get rid of him. But you know by week 4, you know before the bye weeks, you have your answer. Unlike a lot of rookies that are out there, unlike all the hype that will come with them, you do not know by week 4. Because week 4, they just need to get more time. Right. They don't know the playbook yet. We got to wait and see. We'll know early with Jones, which makes him the type of player I want to own, because I will either profit early or I will fail early, and I can use that roster spot elsewhere. Something I preach kind of constantly, which is you want people to fail fast. The worst thing you can have is someone who fails and it takes a long time, or even they succeed and it takes you 3 years. Well, you could have done something a lot better with that roster spot than just sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. With Jones, you're going to get a result quickly, so I like holding him, especially in deeper leagues, when no one's going to be buying him at a nice value today because of the Bobby Wagner signing. So you've kind of made your bed. You got to sit there, unless there's something better on your waiver wire. But in all likelihood, whoever you add on that waiver wire, you're not going to know as fast as you're going to know with Jones, which means you got to sit and wait longer. And, if you just hold Jones, he fails, you cut him, you can probably go add that guy anyways, or someone very near and similar to him. So I like to hold him in a deep league. I don't really see any reason why to pass, especially with injuries. But overall, it's just a general philosophy. You want to find people who will fail fast, and this one will fail fast if that's the case.
For a guy with Troy Reeder that they've been able to use successfully here and there over the last couple of years, how about how they just cut bait on him? It's just like, we're done. I'm not even sure if he signed anywhere else. I don't think he was wooed away. I haven't heard anything about that, but they really just dropped him like a fly. And the reason I'm talking about Troy Reeder is I was getting ready to say, I would anticipate at the worst that we're going to see Ernest Jones popping in and out like Troy Reeder when it comes to IDP. And this is in the deeper format. So standard format, you might not even notice Troy Reeder in the past because he's only really been relevant when whoever he's replacing was the main starter and he was getting that main opportunity. But as the second guy, you probably don't know him so well unless you had some really deep format. I know I've seen people in deeper formats roster him even when he's not the guy, when it's figured out. So I got a feeling that's kind of what it's going to be for. At worst, is we're going to have Ernest Jones lingering in the background, just like Troy Reeder has.
All right. Well, now that we have beaten the Ram to death on the show tonight here, we're going to move on to a couple other signings. And these are more sort of like the same sort of situation, potentially situational guys to be looking at. And this next one certainly is, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on him because he has mattered, even last year when he got on the field. Nick Vigil, he signed with the Arizona Cardinals going from Minnesota. It's a 1-year deal, $1.7 million, so certainly not seemingly starter money. And, of course, they have Simmons and Zaven Collins, the first-round pick from last year there. Collins didn't start last year. It was Jordan Hicks who put on a show and then actually went to Minnesota, so kind of swapping positions. But is he someone that you guys are going to keep an eye on as this goes? James, I'll go to you first on this. In the event that Collins, for some reason, still isn't ready to start, or one of the other two gets hurt based on what you saw of him in Minnesota last year.
Yeah, exactly. He's a guy to keep an eye on. We've known Nick Vigil for a while. We know him as a guy who, whenever he's in there playing, we go, he could be all right, but I'd really like someone else to play because Nick Vigil's very much kind of the definition of production by default. He's good enough to get out there. He's good enough to get snaps. He's not good enough for a team to say, I want this to be the guy who gets all the snaps. He's good enough to sit back and sub in when necessary and knows that defense and can move around a little bit and is basically a sure hand to not make massive mistakes from an NFL perspective. And when you convert that over to an IDP perspective, it's a guy who's just going to be inconsistently consistent. He's going to perform fine when he's out there, but you don't know necessarily when he's going to be out there, how long he's going to be out there, and his starting spot never will feel super secure. So even if there's a world where Arizona decides, we like Vigil early, Collins isn't ready to start and play a lot of snaps. Well, Vigil's going to be feeling like he's never going to be the guy going every single week. So he's someone I want to pay attention to, especially if there's an injury. I'm very interested, but until then, he's just around getting ready to do his Nick Vigil thing, which is get some snaps, have some relevant bye weeks, but ultimately not be someone I want to hold. And, that's what he is.
I couldn't really find anything leading up to him possibly starting. I mean, again, anything can happen. The first thing that popped into my mind is what are their edge rushers looking like, Kraig?
For the Cardinals this year, that is a a great question.
So is it a possibility? Is it a possibility that they might have to do? I mean, he's kind of always played the strong side linebacker. He did it in Cincinnati. He did it in place of Barr. It's not quite your normal inside linebacker position. They're usually bigger guys that can cover and rush. So, I mean, I'm just curious, maybe Vigil might actually see some time there. I still don't think it's anywhere relevant at all at this point. I'm willing personally to wait and watch him be a hot waiver wire ad than I am to go and try to invest something in him right now. I couldn't imagine there being much. They could name him an outside rusher or chart. They could probably. I don't know. I guess the things would change if somewhere along camp or something we heard that he was going to be starting over Zach Allen,
they've Marcus Golden, Devon Kennard, and then Dennis Gardeck are sort of their three main edge rushers.
Kennard's not all that good. Yeah, Kennard's not all that good. Gold's getting golden or old.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. And I really wasn't expecting to start. It was just one of those situations where, for whatever reasons, Collins wasn't ready to play at all really last year, and Hicks was just the guy over him. And you just never know with these guys that sometimes guys aren't ready for a couple of years.
It's possible. You never know. You just never know. You might go out there and that Collins just might bust. It happens.
It does happen, unfortunately.
Yes, it does.
So next position, another position we've talked about not a lot because we all sort of have the same philosophy, but an interesting player, Rasul Douglas. He signed a 3-year, $21 million contract. He's a 27-year-old cornerback this season, and he's going to be playing opposite Jair Alexander in Green Bay. And I found this one interesting because really it sort of ended up being a 1-year deal because it's 3.5 and then 1.7 million dead cap after the first and the second year. 2017, he was a 3rd-round pick, and including practice squads, this was his 7th team. So he's bounced around a lot. The Packers got him off the Arizona practice squad, and then he made a huge play. I think it was an interception, might have been for a touchdown against Arizona for the Packers, and he just took over for them, and they rewarded him. But in the spirit of streaming cornerbacks, because I'm not thinking any of us are saying run out there and grab him, but is he someone that when you're streaming guys, knowing that he's across from a shutdown cornerback, that you would have an interest in looking at and sort of having that star or favorited, whatever you do on your site for guys to keep an eye on? Gary, is he a name that interests you at all with his position?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm not one that's going to go drafting. It's like the IDP incentive. We got 28, 30 rounds or something, and I'm not going to draft me a defensive. Probably draft me a cornerback, at least a cornerback until the last couple. It's like a kicker thing. But if I was lucky enough to get Rasul Douglas, I'd be more than happy to have him. If you already own them, don't question them. Just hang on to them. You can stream them later. I think there's nothing but upside in that situation, and he deserves to get this shot from the team, and I don't see why owners shouldn't give him the shot either. And he's in a perfect case scenario, like you mentioned.
James, how do you feel about that spot in Green Bay?
I don't know if I'm that optimistic on it, kind of for the reason that I don't know if I necessarily believe he's actually that good of a football player. I do believe that, in fantasy football, not being a good corner is kind of good. You want to be right in that mid-level area of constantly getting targeted, making enough stops and interceptions that you're very useful, but also getting beat enough that teams keep targeting you. And I think he could definitely be that guy, but could he venture a little bit too far into not being very good and ultimately being a bad contract and not seeing much of the field? They have Eric Stokes there, and I feel like he's a high variance play. And, with high variance comes high reward. And if you want to invest in him, you've got high risk. So you can invest in him early, and things might not work out well very early. But when you're looking at matchups and they have a nice greasy matchup, oh, sign me up for sure. Ultimately, we harp on it pretty well, but cornerbacks, you want to play the matchups. In general, you don't want to draft anyone and hold them. Sure, there's your Marlon Humphreys of the world, but those are the exceptions. No one on this Green Bay team do I want to draft and hold all season. It's not really a necessarily smart play. I'd rather rotate in defenders and see who has the better matchups. Make my points that way. And even if I'm picking, guys who are the 20th, 30th best corner, I can do well when I play matchups even in that world versus holding a guy who, say, is the 18th best or the 25th best. So, yes and no. He's going to fall in on my matchup radar, but he's not going to fall in on my hold radar.
All right. We're going to switch and go to a defensive end here who I was a bit surprised got the contract that he did, and we all know you can't just look at the numbers. But Derek Barnett re-signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. It was 3 years, 21 million, or excuse me, sorry, 3 years, 15 million, a little bit over that. But they have an out after 1 year with only 1.5 million dead cap. So not a whole lot beyond 1 year for him. He's going to be 26 this year, and for how he was drafted, it was a high draft pick for the Eagles. He really hasn't done a whole lot. He has 1 year, which is this past year, with over 34 combined tackles. 1 year, which would be 2019, with double-digit tackles for a loss. And over the years that he's played, he's had 5, 2.5, 6.5, 5.5, and 2 sacks. So the production, and they do rotate there in Philadelphia, but he just hasn't been a producer. Gary, what did you make of him re-signing there in Philadelphia?
Confusion. I don't know. I think somebody put like too many zeros in, or something went wrong when the contract was really written up, because it makes no sense whatsoever. He's not terrible, but I mean that was a bit much. They have Josh Sweet there. Brandon Graham is still under a contract. I think they could have got a little bit more for their money for sure. And I was really psyched up for him after they got Riddick. I like that signing a lot. And I really truly believe that off of this entire defense at this stage of their careers, the only one that I am going to focus on as an edge rush play, and that's even if he remains designated completely as an edge rush play, would be Riddick. Graham getting older, Barrett's, I'm not sure. He must really impress the coaches and do what they want him to do, over the production that he's bringing in. He must fit his role well for them to go ahead and go there with him. They could have done a lot more. And is it Josh Sweet or Sweat?
Yep.
Right. He's actually flashed. I like him. I thought that he was going to be able to take a step last year. I think there were more than just me that thought he might take a step last year. But apparently that didn't happen. I'm not sure if it was injuries. I didn't track it real well. What do you got on that, James?
Yeah, I'll stop in on the Sweat moment and say, I had him firmly in my DL2, edge rusher guys heading into last season. He was flirting with my top 15. I loved him, and clearly the Eagles don't love him because they have lots of options and they don't want to use him. So, sometimes you miss, and there's another miss for me. But yeah, I don't get this either. We're all in agreement that this seems like an overspend. I'll be completely frank. There's Derek Barnett, and then there's a guy, Derek Morgan, and they're kind of the same guy in my mind, mainly because they're named Derek, but also because they're high first-round picks who are good enough to be out there for sure, but kind of don't meet that first round value, kind of just hover at that 5 sacks of okay productivity and not anyone you really want to throw on your fantasy roster. Because if you're getting 5 sacks over the course of the season, your best case scenario is what? A sack and a half in a game? If you're looking for big production from your edge rusher, and that's your ceiling, that's kind of gross, especially when you have, 35 tackles. It's a surprising contract. Again, like Kraig said, he's probably doing what they want him to do. But I want my guys to, do something, get production, get pressures, get tackles, get sacks, get something. But again, I might be looking at it a little bit too much from a fantasy football perspective, not enough from an actual real life perspective. But since it is a fantasy football perspective, yeah, I don't want Derek Barnett. No, pass.
It was really weird to me too because, and this was the most baffling part of it. After the 2020 season, they re-signed Josh Sweat to a 3-year, $40 million deal. And even if they cut him after 2023, they still got like 14 million dead cap. I mean, they gave him a lot of money for a guy that was also sparingly used. And I know that they like to rotate, and they had success, especially on the interior last year with those guys. And they sort of brought the band back together, and then adding Reddick in there. Maybe that will be the final piece. But if you know he's going to be a rotational piece, even just for 1 year, that's a lot of money for Barnett. So
maybe they're getting ready to drop Graham. Maybe they're going to do something.
That could be.
They could, but
that's the writing I had on the wall. But I feel like don't quote me if I'm wrong here, but his contract situation isn't exactly a very nice movable one. You got to kind of get rid of him with something, in addition. He's not really a net positive when you're getting. I don't know. The Eagles defense has been a conundrum. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Kraig.
They got a lot of dead money tied up in him too if they were to cut him. So I don't see that happening.
Their defense is just an odd conundrum that we seem to not really be able to figure out, both from a fantasy and real life perspective. They're doing some stuff, and
since you're bringing that up, I mean, they have always been like the 1 or 2 bottom team in paying their inside linebackers. But yet, I don't have it in front of me, but yet we hear that they're paying these guys, these average edge rushers, $7 million a year or something. Is that what it is? But they won't pay an inside linebacker more than like $1.5 million or something.
I mean, like Graham this year is about like 7.5. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It makes no sense, but this whole Eagles defense for quite a few years now has been pretty aggravating, from the linebackers to, Fletcher Cox has been a guy that we could depend on. We did have Brandon Graham there for quite a few years as a solid guy, but overall, since the team, the Eagles, about 5 or 6 years ago, it's not the same. It's nothing to get excited about.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, even with the way that they've used their safeties, since like Jenkins left, there hasn't really been a whole lot that you want to use out of them either. So it by and large does feel like a fantasy stay away once again, which can sometimes make things easier for us anyway. So.
Right.
Last guy for tonight is another former high pick. I think he was the number 3 overall pick in 2017, Solomon Thomas. So he's a lot younger than I thought he was. He's only going to be 27 this year. I would have thought he was closer to 30. It seems like he's been around a long time, but signed a 1-year, $2.25 million deal with the New York Jets, moving from the Raiders last year. Thomas really hasn't been a starter since his 2nd year, and this will be his 6th year. He's on a new team for the 2nd year in a row. And if you're just looking at interior linemen, of course, it'll vary by your league. Here's like interior lineman 60. So figure slightly higher for just defensive tackles. He's going to the Jets. So, they had made some moves last year, and they're always trying to figure things out. He does have a relationship with Robert Saleh. So, Gary, this any sort of news for you at all with him, maybe being a starter, or is it just a nothing kind of signing for you at the moment?
I mean, as an overall first-round guy, I mean, you'd have to say he's pretty much been a bust overall. You got Rankins there, then you got Williams up there with him.
They had Lawson as an edge guy, and they signed. What was the guy from the Rams?
He's probably nothing more. What's this relationship he has? When I seen his name on there, I looked for like 2 minutes, and I was already going to give him the thumb down without really. But I now have a question. I mean, what kind of relationship was it that he has with the one coach?
So he had been in San Francisco. That's the team that had drafted him, and he was there before last year. And that's where the Jets head coach, Robert Saleh, came from. He was the defensive coordinator for a few years and had been on the team prior to that being the defensive coordinator. So, I mean, he has a relationship, which I'm guessing played something into going to the Jets to sign that contract. And I don't know.
Right. I think in the end, it's probably one of those situations where it's one of those veteran signings from a former team to help the guys learn the new language of the defense. Just bringing in, we see it happen. And granted, they're not always defensive linemen, but I mean, if the guy's available, he can kind of look like be an on-field coach. I wouldn't imagine him becoming one of the main starters. He'll probably be something in a rotation. But I couldn't see it being relevant.
James, any other thoughts?
I mean, it's exactly what Gary said. It's Saleh's guy from San Francisco coming over. He still has, quote, high upside because he was a high round pick. He doesn't actually have high upside because we've seen he hasn't produced it. So he's very much a guy to come over, give the terminology, help younger people, maybe show up for a random game and have everyone go, woo, look at that. But he's not at all someone I have any expectation to rely on outside of multiple injuries and being forced to play. And, he's the guy who normally gets one of those multiple injuries. So just forget about him. He's a former He's not a current.
He's really, I think, the only one out of that was drafted by San Fran in that stretch where they went with Boza and spent even Buckner spent all that money. Yeah, all that capital, draft capital, and first rounders. I think you can really look at him and say he's the guy that fell flat on his face for him. I used to think that maybe it was a role thing. Maybe it was because of his role. But no matter what, and then when you see how he's graded out below average last year in a situation where Raiders had given him a chance to go ahead and produce and didn't do it. And I mean, there's nothing upside. There's nothing here worth talking about, really. I was shocked to see him on the list, Kraig. I was like,
well, one of the reasons that I put him on there, of course, we're getting towards the end of this main round of free agency, but he was a big name in terms of the NFL draft. When you're drafted that high, you're a defensive lineman. People have hope for you. He was on those teams. It's sort of like that situation didn't work out for him that way. But with Washington, where they had 4, high picks there too, across the line, and those guys actually had all done pretty well together. And like you said, it never really panned out. But I know sometimes when you're not really getting into the depths of IDP, you'll see a guy like that, like, you look into him without digging too deep into it. Well, he was a high pick, and he came from San Francisco like the coach, So it wasn't necessarily I think he'll do something, but sometimes you should put caution up for people too so they don't fall into the traps.
Definitely. And those new additions and stuff that usually, we need to hit on that. We're talking about that, we're about ready to wrap up this frenzy. We're going to hit it again on Thursday, folks. And I mean, there might be a few strays still out there, but I think the majority of the chunk on these shows where we dedicate out all to the free agents is about coming to a close. I think you guys are ready. You ready to move on? Kind of come at this at another angle. I see you both smiling, both shaking your head. So I didn't have to ask personally which one. We've been on this.
I am. But on the other hand, I think we might forget sometimes that there's IDP listeners out there who listen and they go, "Oh, I remember Solomon Thomas." And to Craig's point, they go, "Yeah, he was a high round pick. He's going to a new team. Maybe he'll break out." And what they're really doing is they're going high draft capital. Maybe
Yeah.
And that's not a horrible, horrible process when you're looking at it from the bare bones. But when you want to actually, find out what separates a Solomon Thomas from a different high capital draft bust, well, you got to kind of dive in, and that's what we're here for. We're here to actually separate those things because it's relatively easy to just go, yeah, this guy could break out. People thought he could break out at one point before, so I guess it's still in there. And when you look at the reality of the situation, you can go, not so much. But each person's unique. Each position's different. Each team runs their way, a little bit differently. Plus, we all are wrong. That person thinking about this is wrong. NFL scouts are wrong. NFL players are wrong. Everybody's wrong all the time. But what you want to do is find the people who are right a little bit more than the others.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you got to look at, process, make sure, we try to not go into the weeds too much, but, we do discuss process on here, when we're thinking and getting James and Gary's thoughts on these guys, because if you understand the process behind it, that'll help you figure it out. Of course, Gary's not going to give away his trade secrets. You got to pay for Gary's inside info over on gridironratings.com when he's giving you that info. If you want his real tips, you got to go pay for him. But he has a process behind all of it, and you can go willy-nilly and just, guess. Like Jim said, all right, draft capital, new team. Yeah, there's potentially a spot for him. That is a process, but if you can refine your process each year a little bit more and look at different things, that's what's going to help give you that edge that James is talking about. And that's what we're here for, to help you figure out that process for yourself.
Definitely.
So with that, Gary, any parting words for this Tuesday show? We'll see you again in 2 days, but
yeah. Well, I'm just glad to have this off my chest. As I mentioned, my wife's about ready to kick my ass. It's like I'm moping around, and all of a sudden it's like she's glad it's over too. I've got it off my chest, folks. I'll see you Thursday with Brandon and JJ, and we're going to have the last round of these free agencies frenzy, guys, and I guess we might start dabbling into some type of things to go along with the draft. At least I hear that's a popular subject.
3 weeks, it's coming up here faster than we think.
Ooh, I didn't even watch last year.
Gary's excited. Don't let him fool you guys. He's going to be sitting there all night.
No.
James, any thoughts from your end?
It's kind of the same thing as Gary. We're actually entering the part of the season where we should start, researching and learning about those rookies. Obviously, if you're gung-ho, you already know about everyone. Congrats, you're ahead of the game. But also, they're all going to change their values the second they get drafted. Then they're going to change some values some more the second they get into camp. But it is good to learn about them. It is good to know about people ahead of time. And, what I'm really doing right now, I'm studying depth charts. I'm looking at teams. I'm going, these guys need to draft this position. These guys definitely need to probably cut this guy. The Eagles have too many defensive linemen. These are the things I'm paying attention to because I want to see which holes don't get filled and then go attack the players currently in those holes. That's what I like to do because I like to find the deep league guys and those deep league guys who just walk into that production by default because, 2 linemen went ahead. We're going to go and take a tight end instead. Suddenly, that hole is still a hole. So that's what I like to do. I'm always staring at depth charts. I know people love their rookies and they love their film, but I love names on a chart.
That's going to do it for us. We'll be back next week, of course, same bat time, same bat channel. Thursday night, it's at 8 Eastern, correct?
Yep.
It's a bit earlier, so make sure you tune in then. Do you have something dropping tomorrow, Gary? Another video?
No, actually, we changed the IDP dime drops to Friday. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go this past Friday. We had something come up. But we're going to around 10 o'clock, 9 and 10 o'clock on Friday mornings with the IDP dime drops. I might be dropping a Jordan Whitehead article tomorrow or Thursday. Also, while you mention it, we are actually getting our rankings together. Make sure you keep checking in on those. The IDP rankings and the offensive rankings. We've got some things in motion over there at Gridiron Ratings. You'll want to check it out.
All right. Well, that'll do it. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Again, make sure you hit that like button and get subscribed and notifications on, if not already, on YouTube. But we appreciate you watching us or listening to us wherever you were, and have a great night.